Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy.
What do you got for us today, Claire? What kind of nonsense?
Today we're going to head to the state that is nicknamed the Constitution State. Any guesses?
Virginia? No, I don't know.
Dude.
I don't know.
Virginia?
Pennsylvania.
No, but you're close. Connecticut, particularly Hartford. What? You guessed north.
Okay.
Yeah, it's closer than like guessing California or Nevada.
True.
Anyway, so we're going to Hartford, Connecticut in like 99, 2000-ishes.
Like the Gilmore Girls.
That's what I thought of, but it's not going to be anything gilly. Now, the town of Hartford is only 8 square miles, and although it's a compact little place, it's still considered a city, although it doesn't have like a New York City kind of vibe. It's a little city thing, although it's kind of like there's a bunch of little sections that are other communities. So within Hartford, there's a place called Asylum Hills, which is a poorer area. And that's where we're going to be going to. Which, by the way, just a side note, anybody who comes up with names, I don't want to live anywhere that's called Asylum anything.
I would not want to live there, especially because Connecticut is a fairly expensive state to live in. And then say the town or city I live in is Asylum anything. Nope, no thanks. I'll pass on that one. But to know that it's what they name the poor area,
But we're headed to Asylum Hills.
I bet we are.
Now, our focus is going to be in that area because bodies will start popping up within 1 radius mile in that little area.
Jeez.
So we're going to flash to June 20th, 1999. Several calls are made to 911, same person, about a body and that police need to be over here immediately. But they keep calling and it's just like they're panicky. They're not saying a whole lot. So 911 dispatchers are doing the whole, okay, well, fuck, I can't send anybody anywhere if I don't know where we're going. But they're like not saying a whole lot before the call's disconnected. So it takes them a little bit before they get enough information about where police are needed at, but so that they can send somebody out, which they finally do. And officers go to an abandoned building where they find the body of a woman on the back porch of an abandoned property who had been beaten worse than officers had ever seen. Clearly, someone had had a lot of rage because blood is sprayed everywhere. Her head was crushed in.
Oh, gosh.
Yet there was no sign of a weapon at the scene. So it's just like, I mean, I don't know how long or how hard you have to beat somebody to crush their head in. It was disturbing for officers to find somebody like that, and scary because it's clearly a lot of rage from someone. But her body is taken for an autopsy, and while they're doing that, they track the 911 calls that since it was somebody calling repeatedly, and it turned out they were made from a payphone near where the body was from. Now, after they really have time to like screen all the call, like listen to each one of the calls, they determine they don't think it's the killer who made the call. Just based on the tone and concern that they had, it didn't sound like somebody who, because the caller obviously upset, and seeing somebody like that would be upsetting, and they think because they kept disconnecting the call, they don't want to be a part of this because they're scared of whoever did that. I don't want to be near that, and I can understand a caller being panicky and not leaving their name.
But what I don't understand is if they called multiple times, did they just keep running back to go stare at the dead body and you're calling from the same payphone? That doesn't make sense to me. That means they stuck around in the area, and when police didn't arrive, they called again.
So my thoughts were, no, they're not going back and forth to the same body. Once they saw what they saw, that somebody needs to go over there. And I figured it was like every time 911 asked, can I get your name? Maybe they clicked, and then they call back and be like, hey, police need to come out to this area. There's a body. It's over wherever. And then if they ask, hey, can I get your name? Click, maybe, is what I thought.
I think it's the killer, and they want the police there so they can watch.
Anyway, they don't run any down of the phone call. Now, the manner of death of this poor lady is ruled to be blunt force trauma, and that she had been there about 24 hours before police found her. So now, with her head being so smashed in, they can't identify her, so they have to run her fingerprints in order to figure out who she is when they determine she's 28-year-old LaDawn Roberts. So naturally, they're going to notify her mother that they just found her baby girl. And of course, that's got to be upsetting to hear because you don't expect to get a phone call of your daughter's dead.
Well, then find out how she died.
Yeah, and especially because you don't want to see him like that, so she's not going to be able to see her daughter.
Poor thing.
Now, LaDawn was the baby of the family, and her mom would say that she was a good girl up until she hit her teens and fell in with a bad crowd and started doing drugs and hitting the streets as a prostitute.
You like those cases?
Dude, they just pop up. I didn't realize how rampant prostitution is. It's a real problem. But her mom would say at the time of her death, she was 5.5 months pregnant with a little boy.
Seriously? I'm confused. They didn't notice that?
With what? I don't know. I mean, when I'm just telling you that, damn it, Andrea, I'm just telling you.
Damn it, Andrea, me. You just said that the mom says she was 5.
Okay, so fine. Her mom did because she was real excited about the birth of her baby. Because everybody in her family already had children. She didn't have children, so she was excited about having a little boy. Now, as much as officers dug, they can't find any witnesses, anybody who heard anything, nothing. They also don't find any relationships that she had that would have ended up in her being beaten to death in an abandoned building. Because as we've seen before, prostitutes live dangerous lifestyles. They have all sorts of temporary relationships, so trying to find out who they were with last are very hard.
Yeah, they were.
You're disgusting. So 10 months will go by and that case goes cold because they've got nothing to go on. So that brings us to April 2000 when another call comes in that a body is found face down under an overpass. Now, this lady is also severely beaten with trauma to her face. Again, no weapons found. Her shirt was pulled up around her shoulders. One of her pants legs was removed, but her pants is still on the other leg. Naturally, that makes officers think this was a sexual assault. They do find an ID near the body to belong to a 33-year-old Ida Quinones. Now, Ida had a history of drugs and working the streets as a prostitute. They do have to identify her by fingerprints when she goes for her autopsy because, again, her face is smashed to oblivion.
It's brutal.
But so they have to identify her also through fingerprints when she goes for her autopsy. Now, when they're trying to figure out what exactly was used to crush her skull, you know how they do with the whole see what kind of marks tools will leave, like just to try to eliminate what was used. And then that's when they determined that she was stomped to death.
Oh my gosh.
Now, since her autopsy comes back similar to LaDawn Roberts, with one exception, they find Newport cigarette butts around, like very near the body. Now, that wasn't at LaDawn's crime scene, but they collect them just in case that they're from the killer. But just, I mean, you'd rather collect it and it be nothing you can use than
not collect it and it had been something useful.
Right.
Yeah. Have it and not need it versus need it and not have it. That's what I tell my kids about taking their coats to school.
She does have semen found on her body, but unfortunately at this point, the DNA database is still being established. So not only that, but the swab had multiple DNA samples on there. The issue with this at the time was DNA was so new that they didn't have the technology to be able to separate out multiple samples, where today they can utilize software to be able to build a DNA profile and kind of pull things out. But that just didn't exist at this point in time. So the state's attorney office would put up a $30,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction of whatever sick fuck did this. Unfortunately, people who live in the world of drugs and prostitutes don't do a lot of talking to the police. So that effort flops because snitches get stitches. So nothing comes of that. 2 months later, June 2000, there's a call that a body is found under a railroad bridge. Now, this area is known for being a place where people engage in drugs and prostitution. A woman's found face down, her head's caved in, her shirt's lifted up, one leg is out of her pants. But they're pulled down, partially off. You get the picture, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
She's eventually identified as 32-year-old Rosalind Casey, who's a mother of 5. Now, they believe at this point they've got a serial killer on their hands, just the pattern of, you don't find a lot of bodies where the heads are flattened.
No, that's disgusting. And somebody's got to have some really fucking gross shoes.
That's your focus. So they kind of pool all the officers together, kind of make a mini task force to see if anybody can pull anything out of between these three scenes, something that they haven't seen yet. When they realize that all three scenes are not accessible by a car, and since they're so close to each other, again, we're within a 1 square mile right now, they figure this guy probably doesn't have a car, and also major rage issues.
You think?
Well, right. So another 2 months roll around since the last body was found, and there's another call of a body being found in an abandoned building. She's going to be identified as 33-year-old Rosalie Jimenez. She had been living on the street with her boyfriend. When he went to go get cigarettes, he comes back and she's gone. Now,
That's her pimp. He pimped her out. He can't tell the police that.
well, she doesn't turn up because I guess being homeless, you just do whatever you want to, go wherever. But the next day, he still hasn't seen her, and then he hears word around of the other homeless people that there's a body in an abandoned building. So he goes over there to check it out and identifies her because that's what she was wearing. Now, he's beyond distraught when officers get there, and I can't imagine finding somebody you love or care about or even know killed in that violent of a death. So again, he's beyond distraught, and officers believe that he had nothing to do with her death. And I also would imagine if you stomped somebody to death, you'd be covered in their blood.
You think?
But she had the same head and neck trauma that the previous three bodies had. Blood was everywhere. Officers said that it was probably the worst scene of the women found.
Oh, gosh.
She also had one pant leg off. They find Newport cigarette butts at the scene.
We got us a smoker.
Well, they managed to realize that she's got blood under her fingernails, which is huge. And in the DNA world of just like that, we won't have all the other people or anything else of just...
Can't argue it.
Yeah.
You can argue why a cigarette's out there. A cigarette butt was found, but not...
Or even your semen on a prostitute.
Right, but your blood under somebody's nails, good luck.
Yeah. The DNA that was found in the semen on Ada's body matches the blood that was collected from underneath Rosalie's nails. Now, the good news was that now they know they've got the same feller, so it's not some paranoia. And I can't imagine the horror of thinking that there were multiple people stomping people to death, but the police are still working on their list of fellers. Now, they're trying to prune through, like, all the people they have in the area that are violent offenders or assaults on women. But they still don't find anybody that would fit their profile. Now, they would even go as far as to place female officers on the streets as prostitutes several times as hopes that they could lure their man or get some names from other ladies that maybe those prostitutes aren't willing to talk to officers, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't turn up any information either. And by the way, I can't imagine going through and trying to, or like becoming a police officer to be put on the street as a prostitute.
Became an officer to avoid this lifestyle, not to become it. And what do they do?
I realized they're undercover, but I was like...
I have a question about that, and I know you won't know the answer to this. But okay, so you're a female officer, right? You get put on the street as an undercover prostitute. Obviously, these women left with this man. So are these undercover police officers leaving with Johns? I mean, they would be expected to fulfill some sort of obligation, right? Or do they just arrest the Johns for soliciting in the meantime? Because I feel like at that point, it becomes obvious there's a sting operation going on to scare off the killer. Like, do you get what I'm saying? How do you weed out who's just a John and who's going to be your violent killer until they're already being attacked? Unless they're literally just dressing like prostitutes to go talk to other prostitutes, in which case they're the new whore on the street, and they're not going to be talked to because they're new.
How would you know?
You know what I'm saying? So again, like we always do, I can only reference movies, and I reference Pretty Woman, where Kit was like, "What are you doing?
They're honing in on her turf."
Right. So
whatever.
I don't know. Like it's
also Pretty Woman, but you have the right frame of time. But I don't know. I would assume the female officers are not carrying on prostitute duties in the name of their work.
Right, but I'm saying, are they arresting the men for soliciting? And then at that point, they could have arrested their John, or the assailant as a John, and he just gets a soliciting charge.
No, you're on the wrong track. So fast forward nearly a year later, July 2001. 37-year-old Elisa Ford is found in an abandoned building. She's identified through her fingerprints because her skull is crushed to oblivion as well. Also, more Newport cigarettes are found. Now this time, a bloody boot print is found on her chest, which makes them realize that they're definitely on the right track. It's determined to be a size 11 Timberland boot. Now, DNA is collected at the scene, which is matched to what was at Ida's and then Rosa Lee's crime scenes. So that's 3 bodies that are confirmed to be the same feller. They'd then run a DNA profile when they finally get a hit. My guess would be as they're collecting DNA, it's maybe not a complete thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So they're building this DNA profile. They keep running it, hoping to hit something. When they finally get a hit, and not only on the blood, but also the semen, but also the cigarettes found at the scene, and it belongs to a convicted sex offender, Matthew Stephen Johnson, with an extensive criminal record, and they get super excited that they finally found their guy. They get a bunch of addresses for him and start going out to see where he's at. Because I guess every time he was arrested, maybe he was living at a different place, so it's just like they don't know where he's at right this second, so they're just trying to find where this feller's at. But every address they go to, it's an old address, and he's no longer there. Then they find out Matthew has a twin brother.
Dun, dun, dun.
I was waiting for that. Which makes them worried whether the DNA is his or perhaps his brother's. So that kind of does the whole, makes them a little cringy, because that could throw a huge monkey wrench in their case of, that leaves room for the defense to be like, it wasn't him. How do you know it wasn't his brother? I mean, clearly they got a guy that they got to get off the streets because he is.
Do both brothers have a criminal history, let alone sexual violence?
No.
So you got one that's on the straight and narrow path and one that is a convicted sex offender?
But it doesn't mean that you can't raise a defense of reasonable doubt if you arrest either one of them, that it's an easy defense to say it wasn't me, it was my brother.
I was just asking a question.
I'm giving you an answer.
No, you did not. You beat around the bush. Is the other brother a good feller?
Shh! The good news was they find out the twin lives out of state in Florida. And not only that, but they were able to do background checks and do some digging on him, and he wasn't even in the area during when the ladies were murdered. So they did a big whew with that. And also, they're not identical twins, so the DNA wouldn't be as big of a hiccup if they were identical twins.
They can separate that now.
Yeah, now, well, yeah. But again, it was in its infancy.
Yeah.
So a little bit about Matthew. He was born in Hartford, Connecticut in 1963 and was one of 2 sets of twins plus 9 other siblings.
Holy shit.
So if you're not good at the mathin', that's 12 siblings. He was also considered a trouble child from an early age and had severe learning disabilities. When he hits 12, he's shot in the eye with a pellet gun that would leave him partially blind, and also one eye kind of just floats on out there. You can't look directly at him if one's just floundering somewhere.
I did a case with the one feller that looked like that. He got into a fight at 10 and lost his eyeball.
No. He looked like he ran full speed into a glass because his nose was also bent in a different direction.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so by the time he hits his teens, he's still sucking his thumb and throwing like toddler level temper tantrums. So his parents decide, like, with all the shit they've got, like with the children that they have, they can't handle this one.
Between all the sex the parents want to have and all the children they're supposed to be raising, they don't got time for this shit.
Well, they don't have time for a 12-year-old thumbsucker. So they decide to surrender him to authorities, making Matthew a ward of the state.
That's sad.
Now, he does have the opportunity to spend time with his family on weekends, but he really saw little of his dad after 12. So I feel like his dad was probably doing a lot of working, or he really didn't want anything to do with Matthew, and maybe that was the case with that. So off he goes to the Connecticut Children's Medical Center, where he would do great in sports, but really not do so hot in the academic side. He would be tested and would come up with a 69 on his IQ test. He would also suffer from seizures and is put on medication to lessen the frequency. But he wasn't a very compliant patient. He didn't like being tested for things. He didn't like the whole part of taking meds. So he frequently skipped doses, but then would complain he was dizzy. Now, when he hits 17, he decides he's going to pull off a robbery and ends up instead brutally assaulting a pregnant lady to the point where she miscarries.
That is a vast difference in crime. A robbery versus an assault. Very different.
Well, and I don't know how far along this lady was, but she was described in one news article as heavily pregnant.
That's sad.
So I assume it wasn't like she was early into being pregnant and he wouldn't have known she was pregnant. Not to say he can just go around beating women, but she was heavily pregnant and his assault on her killed the baby.
That's really sad.
But he was sentenced to 4 years, but as we've seen, you don't do a whole lot of time with that.
That's really messed up too.
And he's released and goes back out to doing some bad shit. But now, mind you, during that chunk, he decides, fuck his meds, he's not taking any more of that. He'll fix himself with them illegal ones off the streets. So when he gets out, he starts hitting the drugs and alcohol, which naturally trickles into a life of crime. At 19, he would decide to pull off a heist at the Asylum Hills Cathedral of St. Joseph when he's confronted by the security guard. Matthew flies off into a rage, starts beating the man on the ground with his
With his nuts.
And you're going to feel bad. He starts beating the man on the ground with his nightstick and stomping him. Now, the guard does live, but he has severe injuries and is really lucky to survive. He does have brain damage, and Matthew had hit him so hard he broke the nightstick.
Jeez. What happened to him in the institution that made him such a hostile feller?
Well, he was like a crazy loon anyway. But Matthew would be arrested, tried, and convicted. He would be sentenced to 10 years for attempted murder, which, what the fuck? But that was his 4th felony in 3 years. And of course, he wouldn't serve his full sentence. He'd be released after just 4 years. But as we've seen time and time again, you throw a youngin' into the slammer and they just learn more tricks of the trade and focus on how to not get caught or don't leave witnesses.
Yeah, how to be a better criminal.
Right. So he's released and decides he's going to turn into being a homeless man, and he tries to abduct a lady on the street, but somehow she gets away. So he's perfecting how he's going to do that. And then just after 2 years from his release, Eureka! He finds his victim. He brutally rapes her, then beats her. He does leave her alive, and he gets arrested and tossed back in the clink. Now, he was supposed to be ineligible for parole for 13 years, but at some point, somebody got confused, and there was an oversight because he ends up getting released, barely serving 2 years.
Oh.
Basically, this is a pattern of in and out of jail for burglary, assault, and rape from 1979 to 1997. He's released 5 times in that, while collecting 7 felony charges in an 18-year period, and only twice was he in jail for more than 2 years.
Wow. It's a great legal system that we have.
Dude, when he attacked that security guard, he was let out after 4 months.
I thought you said 4 years.
Like, you're talking, he beat that man, he has permanent damage done, and he served 4 months.
Their system is screwed up.
Now, mind you, once he's released, that's when Hartford or Asylum Hills, all that, the prostitutes start turning up dead. Now, when police learn, because mind you, this is when they're trying to track down who this guy is, and when they're reading his history, they're like, yeah, this is fucking him. Barring the fact that his DNA matches, but this is a pattern of he has so much rage, he has no thought to anybody's life, and he's stomping people.
Yeah.
So once they learn that he's homeless, they start checking shelters when they get a lead that he's at one of the local shelters. So, and that shelter happens to be located like bullseye in the middle of where the victims have been found.
Well, he couldn't go far because the shelters, you got a curfew. You got to be back at a certain time. So he can't travel too far.
So they head over to that shelter and wait. They see him go in, or who they think that's their guy. And then I guess they send one officer in to check to see, because they also have to log in. So they go in just to check to see if that's who just walked in, and they confirm it's him. Now they have to wait for the judge for an arrest warrant. They sit and wait and wait. Then the sun comes up and they finally get that warrant approved. So on January 13th, 2002, they walk in and take him into custody. Now at this point, he's charged with 3 murders, that had his DNA at the crime scene: Ada Quinones, Rosalie Jimenez, and Alicia Ford. Now, Matthew doesn't fight being arrested, but when they get him into the room to do the chit-chatting, he would invite officers to take a giant shit in their own hats. So to say he wasn't cooperative is an understatement, but they certainly weren't getting a confession.
I like that.
I was like, all right. No, it won't be a surprise that when you're arrested that they take your clothes, especially if it could be something that's evidence. And they end up seizing a size 11 Timberland pair of boots.
I'm sure because he's homeless. Where is he cleaning his boots off at? Because they've got to be stained.
I don't know, because I will tell you, that's the only thing that comes of the boots. I was surprised because I was just like, you would think there'd be blood on that. But mind you,
Because
it's over a year later. So I don't know if it's just like it's so deteriorated. The boots, the only evidence is the fact that it matches the print on the lady's chest. But if you recall the boot print that was on her chest, then you might also recall that there were several packs of cigarette butts of Newports around the bodies, and they have Newport cigarettes on him. So Matthew's trial would start in 2004. Now, his defense was that he never met any of these ladies, and he hadn't had sex with a woman since 1982, so they were wrong that his DNA was anywhere. Now, he would speak at his trial and would be sympathetic for the families, but he wouldn't admit that he had any parts in their deaths.
of course not.
The jury doesn't buy any of it, especially the defense of not having sex in years, and convict him on all 3 accounts and send him to prison for 3 life sentences.
Well, if he also has a rape charge, they don't know that he's had sex.
Now, in Connecticut, a life sentence is a max of 60 years for murder. Oh, so that'll be 180 years he has to serve before he's up for parole. I think it's funny because on his little profile for the jail, his like parole date is 2038 or something. It's just funny to see. Did I say 2038?
Yeah.
I meant 2138 because just seeing the year 21 anything is like, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's funny. 2038 wasn't funny. I'm sitting here going, I think your math is off.
Anyway, now in 2008, he does file appeal saying that he couldn't have had his DNA on them as he hadn't had sex since 1982. My guess would be to see if that would stick again. If that doesn't go through, now mind you, the other murders, they were able to, like when they had that little task force, they did pull up a total of 11 murders in that area that were similar. However, there were only 3 that they could link him to, and since he doesn't confess to anything, the rest of these poor women, their cases are unsolved, and he will just be listed as a possible suspect, unfortunately. Now, the good news is he's off the street and he's never getting out again, but I thought it was wild that he was not supposed to be up for parole for 13 years, but somehow he got out in 2.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's a huge fuck up.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's all I gotta say about that.
Our legal system is seriously jacked.
But I felt bad for the ladies. I mean,
For their families.
well, to be stomped to death.
And by the way, I don't feel bad about the security guard because I said with his nuts because it sounded like you said he got smashed in the face with the guy's nuts. And I was just, that's why I was laughing. It was your wording, not the fact that he assaulted the guard.
I just thought it was insane, the level of brutality this feller did. I can't just stomping somebody to death. It's just so disgusting.
It's so gross. But I'm curious if he's homeless in any way, shape, or form during all of that. How is it that he was cleaning his boots off? I realize there might not be because it had been a year before he was arrested. I get that. But he's going back to a shelter or living on the street. Nobody witnessed him covered in blood?
I feel like he just rubbed some dirt in it.
Ugh, it's gross. Hey, I know this has nothing to do with your case, but my case next week, the guy, it's in 1984. He has 11 victims, and he goes around smashing their heads. So
Watch your melons, everyone.
especially if you're in the 80s or 90s.
Or, here's a thought, just don't do the world a prostituting.
Well, none of mine are prostitutes in my case.
I'm telling to our listeners.
I know, but none of my victims are prostitutes.
That you know of.
They're not.
You don't know?
You're going to feel bad about that next week.
No? You don't know that they're not prostitutes. What's to feel bad about? Only they know.
One of them's a 3-year-old.
Well, I didn't say...
Just stop while you're ahead, Claire. Just stop while you're ahead.
I'm ahead.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mind-fucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.